Okay, Craig. Well, will you speak better than I do?
Yes, I will, Drew. Yes, I will.
Will you give us your opinions on Possessor, please?
Yes, I noticed you touched on Possessor there, and I don't think I'd seen Christopher Abbott before, but I certainly saw him in Possessor. Brandon Kroberg, a man who doesn't exist to the best of my knowledge. Brandon Cronenberg, son of David, has released only his second full-length feature film, Possessor, starring Andrea Riseborough as Tasja Voss, an agent for a firm specialising in corporate assassinations. The method of these assassinations involves Voss inserting her own consciousness into the mind of a subject near the target and using their body to commit the act. One quick mental exit by suicide later, and the perfect crime has been committed. Only the process takes its toll on the agents involved, and Voss's boss Gerder, Jennifer Jason Leigh, is concerned that her star operative is losing both her mind and her edge on account of her attachment to her ex-husband and son. The firm's next big job is on the cards and will set them up financially for quite some time. But once inside her unwitting vessel, a former drug dealer working a low-level job inside his fiancé's father's corporation, Voss's mind begins to fall out of sync with her host, and a battle for control ensues, which could ruin the whole operation. It seems by turns easy and disingenuous to suggest that the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree in terms of the Cronenberg name, but while Brandon clearly exhibits some of the body horror sensibilities upon which his father built his reputation, the psychedelic style here is very much his own. I found Possessor much more immediately accessible than his father's early works, and despite, or maybe because of, the oppressive overtones and generally dark subject matter, I enjoyed it a great deal. Having completely forgotten her role in the death of Stalin, I was recalling Riseborough only by her performance in Oblivion, which is about as removed from Possessor in terms of sci-fi as you can probably get. I'm going to go ahead and say that I'd presume those of you who have seen Mandy will find her performance here less of a surprise than I did. Though we never get to know Tanya Voss perhaps as deeply as would be entirely satisfying, Riseborough's performance is nonetheless excellent, her personality a half octave away from those around her as her grip of sanity begins to slip. It's a bold performance in a number of ways, some of which stick out more than others, and it makes me wonder that Riseborough's profile is nowhere near where it ought to be, having once been pigeonholed as the next big thing, before sliding again into something more than obscurity, but certainly less than stardom. Ultimately, though, it's Cronenberg's film, and if this is his jam, then you can count me in for whatever he does next. There are moments of genuinely shocking violence which may be challenging for some viewers, though they seem justifiable enough within the context of the narrative. But it's the director's understanding of tone and willingness to experiment visually that make Cronenberg one to watch. The pervasive sense of unease he has evoked here is right in my wheelhouse, coupled with visual techniques that evoke the best elements of horror works as diverse as early Argento and Jonathan Glazer's Under the Skin. I have a feeling that mileage will vary more than usual in this one, and if someone were to level the argument that Possessor is more surface than substance, I don't know that I could counter all that effectively. It certainly appeals to me, however, and despite a conclusion that feels like it deserved the rest of the movie to have been a little more evenly baked, I very much enjoyed Possessor. And this is where I suspect you guys are going to tell me that you absolutely hated it.
We watched... I think all three of us watched the same version, the version called Possessor Uncut.
Yeah.
Which suggests to me there's a shorter version I could have wasted my time with. Which would have been much more agreeable to me because I hated this with a passion. Actually,
Really?
No, that's not true. I just hated it. I wish there'd been anything for it to give me a passion at all because it's terrible.
Right. We can still be friends, Drew.
It's just, I thought Andrea Riseborough was terrible in this, and Christopher Abbott was terrible in this because there are no characters in this film. Nobody has a personality. Not one person in this film has a personality, and I didn't care about what happened in everything. I get that the idea is that Andrea Riseborough's character is kind of losing her sense of self in this job that she does, but she's a sociopathic murderer who has killed two people within the first couple of minutes of the film, and I don't care. She's not an interesting character. She's just a bad person doing bad things, and there's nothing to suggest she's tormented or any reason why she did this job. No, it's like, oh right, she's a murderer, and now she's corrupted this poor guy's brain. It turned him into murder as well. Great.
My kind of gal.
And then it ends after a couple of days. It's just, no, it's terrible. And it's quite interesting how different you feel about the violence to me, Craig, because I really didn't like it.
I didn't like it. It's not something that I enjoyed, you know.
But, that's good to know. That's certainly reassuring. But, I know, body horror has that kind of stuff in, certain genre pictures, like slasher films and stuff, kind of revel in the gore. But because this film is trying to be so serious, I just felt that it was out of place. It felt so gratuitous. Even the film's opening, the stabbing of that lawyer, it felt almost sexual. It's so over the top, and why are you focusing on so much violence and then ripping out old Seed and Bean's eye and stuff? It's like,
can't see my, no, can't see my poker face.
It's just, I don't know. It's gratuitous. It's unnecessary, and in the tone of the film, it didn't match. It's not like going for cheap thrills or anything, or to make people go ugh, or kind of laugh at the violence. It's like, this is horrible, but I don't think it adds anything. In fact, I think it detracts very much from any potential point it has, although the film doesn't have a point, so no. I didn't like it.
I agree with you about the character, and I think the violence is trying to say something about the state of her character at that point. But the problem is, and I would totally concede this, is that you've got no baseline for what her character is anyway, because you enter into this film, and yes, I think it feels like almost a stylistic choice that these people all seem detached from everything. But I totally get that that's something that will not be appealing to a great number of people, and you could certainly see that as being to the movie's detriment. It didn't bother me as much, but. I do. I can't formulate a great argument against what you're saying.
The Cronenberg apple has not fallen far from the Cronenberg tree. I've got more or less the same thing I'd say with this as I've had a lot of Cronenberg's other work, which is on a lot of levels I kind of respect it, but I'm not sure I particularly like it. If you look at Cronenberg's previous work as well, there's a lot of things that I can see that I like. I was getting strong existence flashbacks through all of this, but that had its, David Cronenberg has this kind of weird sort of sexual body horror thing going on, whereas this is clearly more concerned with just common regard and violence, but they're both kind of leveraging them to produce the same kind of attempts at emotions of it. But what I took primarily from Possessor is that everything was very sterile. I mean, clearly, deliberately. All of it's a very deliberate choice. Even the way these characters are characterless was clearly a calculated choice. I don't think it worked for the film in terms of actually engaging with any of it. It's a very strange film that only seems to put any kind of life into anything when it's in those moments of the extreme violence. And again, that's clearly a deliberate intention on the filmmaker's part, but I don't think it really translated to making an overall film that you could really invest and engage with. I didn't hate it. It's very competently done on a technical level. The physical effects are kind of interesting in an era where you definitely don't have any of that, if not 100% convincing, but some of them are. It's just overall a strange fruit. I wouldn't recommend people necessarily avoid it or see it, but if it's the kind of thing that you're interested in, if you like Cronenberg's previous work, you can see that you would get some mileage out of this just by watching it. I certainly don't hate it, and I don't regret watching it, but it and I would say the same thing about a lot of Cronenberg's previous work. It's just hard to really get into, but there will be a lot of people, when you hit them in the right mood and the right frame of mind, then they will probably get a lot more out of it than just a general audience walking into it. Probably not for them, but yeah, it's certainly not without merit, if not entirely successful in what it's trying to do.
I really enjoyed it, and I think I would acknowledge, I think it, like you say, Scott, it is... I don't get the impression that it's this way by anything other than choice. I think it's a film that sets out to be essentially soulless.
Yes.
If that makes sense. And I'm happy with that. I'm totally on board with that. And for me, it succeeds greatly as a tone piece. I just think it's a tone that I would understand it's not necessarily going to appeal to everybody.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a film that there will be great conversations to be had around necessarily, but I enjoyed it for what it was, and I certainly will be going back to watch it again at some point, and see if I still feel the same way about it afterwards. But there you go. It'd be a boring world if we all liked the same things, and it would certainly be a boring podcast.
Indeed. But it's terrible.